Alright, so here's the other page where I called it a factoring flow chart, and it's the whole idea of helping you understand where to start and then where to go when it comes to factoring, because there's all kinds of directions and you have to keep it all straight. It's expected that you know, okay, this is where I begin, this is where I go next, and you know how to get all the way from beginning to end, okay? So I made this in order to help you out, alright? We have not gotten to the very first thing. Okay, the very first thing we're actually going to tack on to the end because that's just how it's organized kind of in the book. But it's easier. I'll put it in there, but you're not going to see it yet, okay? The very first thing that you always look for is a GCF, and that GCF stands for greatest common factor. So if there's anything you can ever divide out of everything you see, that's the GCF. But we haven't actually seen that yet. What we did was we talked about one type of binomial, which is 2 terms, and one type of trinomial, which are the 3 terms. So when it came to the binomial, there it is. All right, so 2 terms is when you see a binomial. Okay, when you see a binomial, which was the patterns that we did, there's one pattern that we've already talked about, and that was instead of A and B, I used the variables M and N like last year because we had A, B, and C for other things. So I'm going to transition it to M squared minus N squared. So this is a binomial. When you see that you've got 2 things squared, then you just square root them, and it's M plus N and M minus N, okay? So when both of those can square root, you just square root, and then one's the positive, one's the negative. And one of them you saw was, well, I can just come up with one. Let's say we have y squared, so this is an example, okay? Y squared minus 16, okay? Well, we know that y squared can break down to y times y. And then 16, that's a perfect square. There are other pairs, but you care that you can square root it. So 16 is 4 times 4. You want it to be the same. And then since it's a negative 16, it's a positive 4 and a negative 4. Okay? So that's what we talked about. That's one thing. So after you look for GCF, if you have a binomial, then this is one of your patterns, and then we're going to add to these patterns, okay? And we're going to talk about some other types of patterns you could see. And then the other type of pattern we talked about were 3 terms, and those are called trinomials, okay? 3 terms. We saw a lot of them in Algebra 1. We're going to see a bunch here in Algebra 2 as well. So if you have a trinomial, I guess you really don't need the plural. Okay, if you've got a trinomial, we had 2 different versions. Basic, which is what we already talked about, and then you're going to see advanced as well. So, let me scroll. Oh, ew. Hold on one second. There we go. Okay, so I'm not sure why it wouldn't go all the way down for us, but here's the arrow that's coming down to our basic trinomial. So again, we can put trinomial right here. This is the long arrow going all the way down. This is the binomials, because there's a couple more patterns. This is 4 terms, which we're going to get to eventually, but this is our trinomial. So there's 2 types. So I'm going to kind of break it in half. All right, and we had our basic, and then we are going to have our advanced, and I'm going to give maybe a little bit more room for our advanced trinomials. Okay, so our basic trinomial, remember it began with just the x squared. You didn't have a number up front. So basic meant x squared plus bx plus c. You start off with just the variable. There's no number in front. We call that a leading coefficient, okay? And when we did that, we just made our x. We said what multiplies to the end. So what multiplies to C, in this case, because we're just using variables. And what adds to the middle. So we said what adds to B. And then whatever these were, they just went straight into our answer. So x plus something and x plus something. So we just took those two numbers that worked in our x and we put them into our final answer. And that's all it was, okay? So now we're going to have our more advanced trinomials. So I'm just going to go ahead and write right here. The advanced trinomials, I'm going to write it just a little bit smaller. Okay, do lead with a number, and it's a x squared plus bx plus c. So there's a number out front. So that's the biggest thing that we have to look out for. If there's a number, then you have to take it a little bit further. We start with our x, but then we have to take it to one other part, okay? And that other part has to do with a GCF. So actually, let's stop with this one. We'll talk about a little bit more things, and then we'll come back and we'll fill that in. But that's the difference between x squared and ax squared, whether you get to just stop or whether you have to keep going, okay? So that's the beginning of knowing the directions of our flowcharts.